Imagine waking up on a peaceful morning, stretching, sipping your coffee, and then looking out your window, only to see a stranger cutting the lock off your own Jeep, smiling like it belongs to them. What would you do? That was exactly the moment Marcus Williams faced one Saturday morning. To the neighbors, Marcus was just a quiet man who minded his own business. He didn't throw loud parties, he didn't gossip over fences, he didn't cause trouble. He left early for work, came home late, and lived with a calmness that most people envied. Nobody knew what he really did for a living, and Marcus preferred it that way. Behind his calm exterior, he carried a responsibility bigger than anyone on his street could ever imagine. Marcus was part of a police task force, a specialized team trusted with undercover operations and sensitive missions. The Jeep in his driveway wasn't just a vehicle. It was an official task force unit. Hidden inside were files, encrypted radios, and equipment that no civilian could ever be allowed to touch. To Marcus, that Jeep was untouchable property. To his neighbors, it was just another car. But to one woman, known quietly in the community as the HOA Karen, it was an eyesore that she decided to remove. That morning was supposed to be peaceful. The sun was bright, children rode bicycles, and Marcus finally thought he'd have a rare, calm day off. He poured his coffee, leaned against the kitchen counter, and let out a sigh of relief. For once, he wasn't rushing out the door with a badge tucked away in his jacket. Then he heard it. Clink, clank, snap. He froze. At first, he thought maybe one of the kids had dropped something on the sidewalk, or a delivery driver had bumped into a gate. But when he stepped closer to the window, his entire body went rigid. A woman in oversized sunglasses with a floppy floral hat stood by his Jeep with a pair of bolt cutters in her hands. She pressed them against the thick metal lock that secured the Jeep, and with one final squeeze, crack, the lock snapped and hit the concrete. Marcus rushed outside, his coffee forgotten on the counter. His voice rang sharp but controlled. "Excuse me!" The woman didn't even flinch. She turned her head slowly, her curls bouncing as she adjusted her sunglasses. "This vehicle is in violation," she said smoothly, like she had rehearsed the line. "It's been parked here far too long. I'm authorized to remove it." Marcus blinked in disbelief. "Violation? This is my Jeep, on my property." She crossed her arms and smirked, as if amused by his confusion. "Not anymore. The HOA has rules. You're cluttering up the neighborhood. I've given enough warnings. Consider this impounded." Before he could answer, she reached for the Jeep's handle like she was about to climb inside. A few houses down, curtains rustled. Windows cracked open. Neighbors peeked out, some lifting their phones to record. To them, it looked like a bold HOA enforcer confronting a stubborn neighbor. To Marcus, it was a nightmare unraveling in real time. Every ounce of his training told him to stay calm. But deep down, he knew this wasn't just about losing a vehicle. If Karen managed to open that Jeep, even for a second, she could stumble across equipment and files that could jeopardize ongoing operations. She had no idea what kind of storm she was walking into. "Step away from my vehicle," Marcus said, his voice low but firm. Karen tilted her chin up, smirking as if she had already won. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The HOA backs me. If you have a problem, take it up at the next meeting. Until then, this Jeep is mine to handle." Her words cut deeper than she realized. She had no authority, no legal power. But the arrogance in her tone swayed the curious crowd. Marcus saw it in their faces. Neighbors who once waved politely at him now whispered, questioning if he really was in the wrong. Even kind old Mrs. Henderson across the street called out softly, "Marcus, dear, maybe she's right. Maybe you should move it." That stung. He wanted to shout the truth, that this Jeep wasn't clutter, it was an active task force vehicle, that his silence was not guilt but duty, but classified meant classified. He couldn't explain. He could. Only stand there, accused in his own driveway, treated like a criminal by a woman with bolt cutters. Karen took his silence as weakness. You see? He knows he's wrong. I'll call the tow company right now. She held up her phone proudly. Marcus's chest tightened. He had seconds to think, to act, to keep the contents of that Jeep safe. He took a step closer. Ma'am, you don't know what you're doing. This isn't what you think. Oh, I know exactly what it is, she cut in sharply. An eyesore, and I'm not letting it ruin our neighborhood. She yanked at the handle with force. Marcus's heart dropped. Inside the Jeep, a silent sensor activated. It wasn't a blaring car alarm. This was something different, something designed for emergencies. A discreet signal pinged across encrypted channels, sending a message straight to his task force team. Somewhere across the city, screens lit up. A red marker flashed on a digital map. A voice echoed in a control room. Unit compromised. Location flagged. Marcus clenched his fists. He knew what that meant. Help was coming. But when? And what would Karen do in the meantime? The neighborhood buzzed with whispers, judgment, and the glow of camera phones. To them, it was drama for entertainment. To Marcus, it was the unraveling of a secret life he had built with such care. Karen thought she was removing a Jeep. She had no idea she had just trespassed into the world of a police task force. And now, the storm she started was about to spread far beyond the neighborhood. The lock lay broken on the concrete, but Karen's smug expression stood taller than ever. She had her phone pressed against her ear now, speaking loudly enough for the whole street to hear. Yes, I need a tow truck. The address is Maplewood Drive, space number 12. Yes, it's an abandoned Jeep. Bolt lock already removed. She threw a sharp look at Marcus as if daring him to interrupt. Make it quick! Marcus's pulse raced. The seconds felt like hours. Neighbors lined the sidewalk now, some whispering, some holding up their phones to record what looked like a neighbor versus HOA showdown. No one truly understood what was at stake. Karen hung up and crossed her arms, her lips curling into a grin. There. Tow truck's on its way. Better grab whatever junk you've got inside because in less than an hour, this thing is gone. Marcus stared at her in disbelief. He wanted to tell her she wasn't just calling a tow company. She was triggering something far bigger. Something even she couldn't control. But every word he wanted to say caught in his throat. Classified meant silence. Silence meant carrying the weight alone. Mrs. Henderson shuffled closer, her cane tapping against the sidewalk. Karen, dear, maybe you've gone too far this time, she said quietly. Her kind eyes darted toward Marcus. He's never caused trouble before. Maybe this isn't what it looks like. Karen turned sharply, her sunglasses glinting in the sun. That's exactly how rule breakers get away with things. He's been parking this Jeep for weeks without moving it. Rules exist for a reason, and I intend to enforce them. Marcus clenched his jaw, his knuckles tightening at his sides. He had spent years enforcing laws, risking his life in operations most people would never hear about. Yet here he stood in his own driveway, treated like a delinquent because he refused to bow to an HOA bully. The irony cut deep, sharper than Karen's bolt cutters. He took one slow step forward, his voice measured. You don't know what you're doing. That vehicle doesn't belong to you, and if you touch it again, you'll regret it. The crowd gasped softly at his words. Karen smirked, as though he had just given her the drama she wanted. Regret? The only one who's going to regret anything is you, when you're paying thousands to get this clunker back. She reached for the Jeeps, handle again tugging harder this time. Marcus's chest tightened as he heard the faint click from inside, the second activation of the silent system. Another signal had been sent. His team was surely moving now. Across the city in a plain building with no signs, phones buzzed and alerts flashed across screens. A voice rang through the task force control room. Unit vehicle breach confirmed. All operatives, stand by for deployment. Boots hit the floor. Radios buzzed. A convoy stirred to life. None of them knew yet that the threat wasn't a gang or an enemy, but a woman in a sun hat fueled by arrogance. Back in the neighborhood, the whispers turned into debates. One man muttered, "She's right. Rules are rules. That Jeep's been there too long." Another shook his head. "This doesn't feel right. He's always been respectful. Something's off." Marcus could hear every word, the sting of doubt heavy in the air. His reputation, his dignity, his very identity, all reduced to gossip and phone recordings. And yet, he couldn't explain himself. He had sworn an oath to silence. Karen held her head high, pretending the crowd was her jury. "See, even the neighbors agree. This Jeep doesn't belong, and I'm fixing the problem." Marcus looked at her steadily, his calm voice betraying the storm inside. "Karen, you're walking into something you won't be able to walk out of." She laughed loudly, tilting her head back. "Please, I've dealt with stubborn men before. You're all the same, thinking the rules don't apply to you. But here, I make the rules." A car turned slowly onto Maplewood Drive. Its tires rolled smoothly against the pavement, its black paint gleaming under the sun. The crowd turned as one, their chatter dropping to silence. It wasn't the rusty tow truck they expected. It was a sleek black SUV with tinted windows, its engine purring, with authority. Karen's smile widened. "Perfect. That must be them. Let's get this over with." But Marcus's eyes narrowed. He knew that vehicle. The faint hum of its engine, the exact way it idled in place, it wasn't a tow truck at all. His heart pounded as the SUV rolled to a stop at the edge of his driveway. The tinted window slid down, just enough for him to catch a glimpse of a familiar pair of eyes staring back at him. His stomach tightened. It was his team. They had arrived faster than he expected. The neighbors murmured nervously, unsure of what to make of the sudden appearance. Karen, still confident, raised her voice so everyone could hear. "Finally! Now we can remove this violation once and for all." She had no idea the people inside that SUV weren't here to help her. They were here because she had crossed a line far bigger than HOA rules. Marcus's hands curled into fists as he realized the collision that was about to unfold. His classified world crashing headfirst into Karen's petty hunger for control. The storm was no longer approaching. It had arrived. The black SUV idled at the curb, its tinted windows hiding the figures inside. The air on Maplewood Drive grew heavy. Neighbors who moments ago had been whispering now stood frozen, waiting to see who would step out. Karen adjusted her sunglasses, her grin smug and unshaken. To her, the arrival of the vehicle meant victory. To Marcus, it meant the line between his two worlds was vanishing. The driver's door opened with deliberate slowness. A man in a dark suit stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, his expression sharp. He didn't look like a tow truck driver. He looked like an authority. The murmurs in the crowd rippled with unease. A second man followed, then a third, all dressed similarly, their movements synchronized, precise, controlled. Karen clapped her hands together. "Well, it's about time. I hope you brought the right equipment because this Jeep is locked up tighter than it should be." She jabbed a finger toward Marcus. "He's been ignoring HOA rules for weeks, and now he's going to face the consequences." The suited man didn't respond to her. Instead, his eyes locked directly onto Marcus. For a long second, nothing was said, but in that silence everything was understood. Marcus gave the faintest nod, and the man returned it. Karen frowned. "Hello? I'm talking to you. This is an HOA matter, and I've already authorized the removal. Now do your job and get this junk off my street." The man stepped closer, his calm voice carrying a weight that silenced the entire block. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle." Karen laughed. "Finally, someone with sense. Don't worry, I'll move once you're ready to tow it. Her laugh died when the man's tone sharpened. This isn't a tow, and you are interfering. With property you have no authority to touch. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Karen blinked, confusion clouding her face for the first time. Excuse me? I'm the one with authority here. I'm part of the HOA. I enforce the rules. He's the one out of line. She gestured furiously at Marcus, her voice rising. That Jeep is a violation, and it's being removed today. End of discussion. The man's eyes narrowed. Ma'am, you've already tampered with restricted property. That lock you cut, that was government issued. You need to step back now. The words struck the crowd like thunder. Neighbors who had been ready to side with Karen exchanged nervous looks. Mrs. Henderson gasped softly, her hand clutching her cane tighter. Phones recording the scene shook as people tried to capture every word. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she faltered. Government? No. You're lying. This is just a Jeep. Look at it. It's nothing special. Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm but firm, carrying the quiet authority he had held back all morning. Karen, you should have listened when I told you this wasn't what you thought it was. Her eyes darted between him and the suited men. Panic flickered behind her arrogance. You're bluffing. You're all bluffing. This is a setup to scare me. The suited man raised his hand, and two more figures stepped out of the SUV. One of them carried a black case, the kind only seen in movies, secure, coded, locked tight. The air thickened. Even the children who had been playing on the sidewalk moments ago were silent now. Marcus felt the weight of every eye on him. He had worked so hard to keep his life quiet, to be the ordinary neighbor no one suspected. But there was no hiding anymore. Karen had pulled the cover off his world, and now the entire street was seeing a glimpse of who he really was. Karen tried to regain control, her voice shrill. You can't just barge in here pretending to be. Who even are you? This is private property. You don't get to intimidate me. The leader of the team pulled out a badge, holding it just long enough for the crowd to glimpse the seal glinting in the sunlight. Federal Task Force. This vehicle is under our jurisdiction. Any further interference will be considered obstruction. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, shouts, phones zoomed in. A few neighbors stepped back instinctively, as though the Jeep itself had transformed from an eyesore into something untouchable. Karen's confidence was shattered. She stammered. I didn't know. No one told me. I thought... Marcus stepped forward, his gaze steady on her. You thought wrong, and you nearly compromised something far bigger than you realize. Her hands trembled, but she tried to hide it by adjusting her sunglasses. I was just enforcing rules. That's all. The neighborhood has standards. Marcus's eyes softened for just a moment, not out of sympathy, but from the weight of truth. There are rules everywhere, Karen. The difference is knowing which ones actually protect people and which ones just make someone feel powerful. The silence that followed was deafening. The neighbors who had once doubted Marcus now looked at him with a mixture of awe and unease. Karen, for all her bravado, suddenly looked small, her shoulders tight, her posture defensive. The leader of the task force gestured toward the Jeep. We need to secure the vehicle immediately. The team moved with precision, one checking the doors, another scanning the perimeter. Their movements were efficient, practiced, leaving no doubt in anyone's mind that this wasn't just some dramatic neighborhood argument. Karen backed away slowly, her face pale beneath her tan. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. Marcus's voice was steady, quiet, but unyielding. You did more than cause trouble. You put yourself and everyone here in danger. The crowd felt the weight of his words. For the first time, Maplewood Drive wasn't just another suburban street. It was a stage for something bigger, something none of them had ever imagined touching their lives. And though the Jeep was now being secured, Marcus knew the fallout was only beginning. His world had been exposed, his cover shaken, and Karen's arrogance had set events in motion that no one in the neighborhood was ready to face. The street was so quiet you could hear the rustle of leaves drifting in the breeze. The task force, agents moved with calm efficiency around the Jeep, their black suits and sharp movements making the neighbors' whispers fade into uneasy silence. Every camera phone stayed up, but hands trembled as people realized this wasn't neighborhood drama anymore. It was something far more serious. Karen stood frozen in the middle of the driveway. Her boldness, once unshakable, had shriveled. She adjusted her sunglasses with shaking fingers as though hiding her eyes would hide her guilt. Yet, even as she shrank back, a trace of defiance clung to her posture. I was only doing what was best for the neighborhood, she muttered. Her words, softer than before, didn't carry the same command. They sounded like excuses. Marcus watched her, his chest heavy. He had seen hardened criminals break down under interrogation, had seen people cling to lies even as the truth crushed them. Karen wasn't a criminal, not in the sense he was used to, but her arrogance had placed her dangerously close to destroying something she couldn't possibly understand. The lead agent turned to Marcus, his voice low but firm. We'll be relocating the vehicle. Protocol demands we secure everything. Marcus nodded, but his heart ached at the exposure. Every neighbor now saw him differently. No longer the quiet man who simply mowed his lawn and waved politely. They now knew he carried a hidden life. His cover wasn't blown completely, but enough pieces had slipped that curiosity and gossip would spread like wildfire. Karen found her voice again, her tone sharp and desperate. You can't just make me look like the villain here. I was following the rules. You never explained what this Jeep was. How was I supposed to know? Marcus turned his gaze on her, steady and calm. Some things aren't meant to be explained, Karen. You could have asked. You could have listened. Instead, you cut the lock, called a tow, and tried to claim power that was never yours. Her cheeks flushed. For once, the crowd didn't back her up. The neighbors who had once nodded along with her crusades now looked away, their arms crossed, their faces tight with unease. Mrs. Henderson shook her head slowly, disappointment etched in her wrinkled features. Karen's voice cracked. I didn't mean any harm, I was just... The lead agent cut her off coldly. Intentions don't erase actions. What you did today could have compromised active operations. Do you realize the consequences? Her mouth opened, but no words came. She hugged her arms around herself, shrinking under the weight of the truth. The Jeep's doors were secured, the back checked, and locks replaced with new coded seals. The team worked quickly, their presence as precise as a blade. The black SUV waited silently, its engine still humming, a shadow ready to swallow the Jeep and carry it away from the prying eyes of Maplewood Drive. Marcus felt a pit in his stomach as he watched. That Jeep had been more than a vehicle. It had been his shield, his tool, the piece of his real life he carried into his hidden one. Watching it being taken was like watching a part of himself vanish down the street. But protocol was protocol. His cover demanded sacrifice. Karen's voice rose again, shaky but desperate to claw back control. So what? I'm the bad guy now? I was trying to keep this neighborhood safe, to keep it beautiful. And you, she jabbed her finger toward Marcus. You just stood there acting better than everyone else. Marcus stepped closer, his presence calm yet commanding enough to silence her. His voice carried the quiet strength of someone who had seen too much to be rattled by petty words. I never thought I was better than anyone here. I just wanted to live in peace. But peace doesn't come from control, Karen. It comes from respect. Her eyes flickered with something almost human. Regret, maybe fear. But she quickly turned away, muttering under her breath. The neighbors saw it, though. They saw the woman who once strutted through HOA meetings reduced to someone exposed. Her authority stripped bare. The task force finished its work. One agent approached Marcus. "Vehicle secure. We'll take it from here." Marcus nodded again, his face unreadable. The Jeep was slowly loaded toward the waiting SUV. Its familiar, frame vanishing behind tinted glass. The neighborhood watched in stunned silence, none daring to speak until the last door shut and the SUV's engine roared to life. As the convoy rolled away, the street seemed emptier than before, as if a piece of its illusion had been stripped, away with it. For Marcus, the departure left a heavy silence in his chest. He had done everything right, everything by the book, yet still he was exposed in a way he had never wanted. Karen stood in the center of it all, abandoned by the authority she thought she had, left with only her neighbor's eyes on her. She swallowed hard, forcing her voice to steady. "I only wanted what was best for everyone." No one answered. A few neighbors turned and walked back inside, unwilling to be part of her excuses. Others lingered, their gazes cold, their whispers sharp. Her reign of control had cracked, and the fracture was impossible to hide. Marcus turned quietly, walking back toward his door. Every step felt heavier than the last. He could feel the eyes of his neighbors burning into his back, filled with curiosity, suspicion, and awe. He didn't look at Karen again. He didn't need to. She had already felt the weight of what she had done. Inside his house, Marcus closed the door and let the silence wash over him. For a man used to danger and high-stakes missions, it wasn't the task force that shook him. It was the exposure, the fragile line between his hidden life and the quiet one he had tried to build here. Karen had crossed it with a single cut of a lock. And though the Jeep was gone, Marcus knew the consequences of her actions would linger long after the convoy disappeared down the road. The neighborhood would never be the same. That night, the neighborhood seemed quieter than ever, though the silence wasn't peaceful. It carried tension, like the heavy pause before a storm. Lights flicked off one by one. Blinds closed earlier than usual, and whispers floated through thin walls as families replayed the day's events. Maplewood Drive wasn't talking aloud, but it was far from silent. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a cup of untouched coffee. The steam had faded long ago, yet he hadn't moved. His mind replayed every moment, every glance, every word. For years he had blended into this neighborhood. To most, he was the quiet man, who kept to himself, respectful, polite. Now thanks to Karen, that cover had been pierced. He wasn't fully exposed, but the mystique around him was dangerous. People would wonder, people would talk, and in his line of work, curiosity could kill. Across the street, Karen's house still glowed with light. She hadn't drawn her curtains. Marcus imagined her pacing, muttering, replaying her own version of events. For someone like her, silence was unbearable. Her power came from being heard, from being obeyed. Tonight, she had neither. The neighborhood's cold stares still hung around her like chains, binding her tighter than any rule book could. Morning came slowly, pale sunlight filtering through the trees. Marcus stepped outside, as he always did, to water the small garden. He had carefully tended. It wasn't much, just a patch of flowers and a few shrubs, but it was his anchor, the piece of normal life he protected fiercely. Today, though, even the simple act of watering plants felt different. Curtains shifted, eyes peaked, neighbors lingered longer on their porches, pretending to check the mail or sip coffee as they watched him. He didn't acknowledge them. His routine stayed steady, each action deliberate, calm. If they were looking for cracks, he wouldn't give them any. But inside, a storm brewed. Karen's door swung open suddenly. She stepped out, her posture stiff, her sunglasses already in place, though the sun barely touched the street. She walked with forced confidence, her chin high, but her pace betrayed her. Her heels clicked too sharply against the driveway, like a performance meant to remind the world she was still in control. She carried a clipboard, as always, though the pages fluttered loosely in the breeze. She stopped at the Hendersons' lawn, then the Millers', scribbling notes with dramatic flair. But the neighbors no longer greeted her. They didn't wave. They didn't smile. They stood at their doors or windows, arms folded, lips pressed tight. Karen's words, once commands, now floated unanswered in the air. Finally, she reached Marcus's property. Her pen hovered above the paper, her jaw tightening. Marcus looked up slowly, his watering can still in his hand. Their eyes locked across the lawn. "You need to move those flower pots back 3 inches, she said, her voice loud enough for the street to hear. "They're encroaching past the HOA line." The words hung in the morning air, brittle and hollow. No one moved. No one agreed. Marcus set the can down gently. 3 inches, he repeated softly, almost to himself. He wiped his hands on his jeans, then stepped closer, his calm demeanor like stone against her flaring temper. "You know what your problem is, Karen?" His voice was low but carried, cutting through the stillness. "You measure life in inches, rules and checklists, but you never measure the cost of what you do to people." Karen's pen trembled in her grip. Her jaw worked as though forming words, but none came. From across the street, Mrs. Henderson's door opened. "Leave him be, Karen," she called, her voice firm. It wasn't loud, but the weight of it was undeniable. The Millers stepped onto their porch, adding their silent presence to the moment. The Lopez family came out too, standing together. One by one, doors opened, neighbors emerging, not for Karen, but against her. Karen's sunglasses slipped slightly down her nose. She pushed them back quickly, but not before Marcus saw her eyes, wide, darting, uncertain. For the first time, her authority cracked publicly. "You've spent years trying to control this street," Marcus continued, his tone steady. "But control built on fear never lasts. Today you're learning that." A hush fell over the crowd. The words weren't shouted, but they struck like a hammer. Karen's pen snapped in half in her hand. Ink streaked her clipboard. She turned sharply, marching back toward her house without another word. Her heels clicked too fast, too loud, echoing like retreat. The neighbors stayed silent until her door slammed shut. Then, slowly, they turned their gazes to Marcus. Not hostile, not fearful, curious, respectful. Marcus gave them a small nod. Nothing more, before picking up his watering can again. His routine continued, as though the moment hadn't happened. But everyone watching knew it had changed everything. Inside her house, Karen pressed her back against the closed door. Her breaths came in quick, shallow bursts. She dropped the broken pen and crumpled notes, pacing the floor like a caged animal. For years she had ruled Maplewood Drive. Today, with a few words and a street full of eyes, that rule had slipped through her fingers. She wasn't ready to give it up, and Marcus knew it. The battle between them wasn't over. It had only just shifted. The neighborhood was no longer her army. It was her jury. And each day that passed would be another trial she couldn't control. Marcus poured the last of the water over the flowers, his gaze lingering on the horizon. Peace was fragile here now. He could feel it. But unlike Karen, he didn't fear losing control. He only feared what length she might go to next, desperate to claw back what she thought was hers. And in his world, desperation was the most dangerous weapon of all. The next few days unfolded like a strange play, where everyone knew their roles had shifted, but no one dared to speak the script aloud. Maplewood Drive, once quiet and predictable, was caught between two forces: Karen's desperate grip on control and Marcus's quiet, steady presence. The neighbors found themselves watching more closely, weighing every movement, every word, wondering what would come next. Karen barely left her house at first. Curtains stayed drawn, lights flickered late into the night, and shadows paced back and forth across the windows. When she did emerge, it was with a forced sense of authority. A new clipboard, new rules hastily written, her voice louder than before. But the power had drained from her commands. People no longer snapped to attention. They listened politely, then turned away. Even her old allies avoided eye contact, pretending to be busy when she approached. It was as if the entire street had woken up from a long sleep. Marcus noticed it too. Every evening, as he watered his garden or washed his Jeep, someone new stopped by. Small conversations at first, quick greetings, cautious words of support, then longer chats, stories, gratitude. The Hendersons brought over cookies one night. The Millers offered help with repairs, and even the Lopez children waved excitedly whenever Marcus walked by. The community that Karen had divided for years was slowly knitting itself back together, around him. Marcus didn't ask for it. In truth, it made him uneasy. He wasn't here to be anyone's leader. He was here to live quietly, to keep his cover intact. But trust had a way of gravitating toward those who stood firm when others faltered. And whether he liked it or not, that's what the neighbors saw in him. Karen saw it too, and it drove her deeper into rage. One late evening, just as the street lamps flickered on, Marcus caught sight of her standing at the end of his driveway. She wasn't holding her clipboard this time. Her hands were empty, clenched into fists at her sides. "You think you've won, don't you?" she hissed, her voice sharp, carrying through the still air. Marcus leaned against his Jeep, his arms folded. He didn't rise to her bait. "This isn't about winning, Karen." Her laugh was bitter, hollow. "Don't act noble with me. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. You turned them against me. Do you know how long I've held this neighborhood together? Without me, this place would fall apart." Marcus shook his head slowly. "You didn't hold it together. You held it hostage." Her face twisted, her composure slipping. For the first time, Marcus saw something raw in her eyes. Not just anger, but fear. The fear of being irrelevant, of losing the one place where she could dictate every move, every choice. "You don't belong here," she spat. "You never did. And I will find a way to make sure you're gone." With that, she spun on her heel and stormed off, disappearing into her house. The door slammed so hard it echoed down the street. Marcus exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. He knew that tone too well. He had encountered it countless times in his work. Desperation laced with pride, a volatile mix that made people unpredictable, dangerous. Karen wasn't finished. If anything, she was only beginning. The next morning, the signs appeared. Flyers, slipped under doors, messages pinned to mailboxes, accusing Marcus of all sorts of fabricated violations, illegal parking, unapproved modifications, even disturbing the peace. Each paper carried Karen's signature, bold and underlined, as though she thought authority could be reclaimed by sheer force of will. But the neighbors weren't buying it. Instead of outrage at Marcus, they voiced their anger at her. Families tore up the flyers in front of her. Children laughed at the absurd claims. The more she pushed, the weaker her grip became. Still, Marcus couldn't shake the unease. Her tactics were sloppy now, but desperation often escalated. That evening, as he locked his Jeep, he noticed faint scratches along the side. Thin, but deliberate. A warning. His jaw tightened. He had expected this. He just hadn't expected it so soon. Inside his house, he pulled out a small black notebook, the kind he hadn't touched in months. He flipped through old notes, codes, and contingency plans. He wasn't just a man with a Jeep and a past. He was trained for conflict, for unpredictable moves, for enemies who struck from the shadows. Karen wasn't an enemy in the usual sense, but her stubborn obsession could tip into something far more dangerous. The next day, Marcus saw her again, standing on her porch as he stepped outside. Her stare burned across the street, unblinking. Like a challenge. Neighbors pretended not to notice, but everyone felt the tension. It was no longer about rules, no longer about one Jeep. It was a battle for control, for pride, for the survival of reputation, and in battles like that, someone always went too far. Marcus stayed calm on the outside, but inside, gears were turning. He could feel the story shifting, the quiet neighborhood turning into a stage for something much larger than anyone realized. If Karen continued down this path, she wouldn't just lose her authority, she might destroy herself in the process. He only hoped the neighborhood wouldn't get caught in the crossfire. That night, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Marcus sat in the dark, listening. Every creak of the floor, every rustle of the wind carried weight. He wasn't just waiting for sleep. He was waiting for the next move, because Karen was far from finished, and Marcus knew better than anyone. A cornered adversary was the most dangerous kind of all. The storm that had been brewing for weeks finally broke. It wasn't thunder or lightning that shook Maplewood Drive, but something quieter, something more dangerous, the final unraveling of Karen's grip on the neighborhood and the truth of who Marcus really was. The night began innocently enough. Families tucked into their homes, lights glowing warmly through, curtained windows, the hum of televisions blending with the steady patter of rain. Marcus sat by his front window, his Jeep parked like a silent sentinel in the driveway. He knew Karen's last outburst hadn't been her end game. She wasn't the kind of person who bowed out quietly. Pride had her by the throat, and pride made people reckless. Just past midnight, movement caught Marcus's eye. A shadow slipped across the street, darting from one lawn to another. At first, he thought it might be a teenager sneaking home late. But then he saw the bolt cutters glint under the streetlight, and his stomach tightened. Karen! Her raincoat hood was pulled low, but Marcus recognized the stride, the rigid determination. She wasn't alone either. Another figure lagged behind. Her, a man Marcus hadn't seen before. His posture was nervous, his head constantly turning. Clearly not a willing accomplice, more like someone she'd pressured or bribed. Marcus's instincts sharpened. He moved silently, slipping on his jacket, checking the small comms device he kept hidden for emergencies. He had hoped never to use it here, but now he didn't have a choice. Karen and the man reached his Jeep. She gestured sharply, and the man bent down, fumbling with the chain and lock. The clinking of metal echoed through the rain. Karen stood back, arms crossed, her face twisted with vindication. "This will end tonight," she muttered, her voice just loud enough for Marcus to hear through the cracked window. He stepped outside before they could do more damage. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and the sound made Karen freeze. She spun around, eyes wide, then narrowed as she saw him. "You don't scare me, Marcus," she snapped, her voice shaking only slightly. "This neighborhood doesn't belong to you. Do you think that Jeep makes you special? You don't belong. Here?" Marcus walked forward slowly, calm, every step measured. "Karen, you've gone too far. You don't need to do this." Her accomplice dropped the bolt cutters, his hands trembling. "I didn't sign up for this," he mumbled, backing away. But Karen grabbed his arm, digging her nails into his sleeve. "Stay," she ordered. "You're part of this now." Marcus's voice stayed level, though his heart pounded. "You're making a mistake. That Jeep doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to something bigger. And if you cross this line, it won't just be me you're answering to." Karen laughed bitterly. "What, the police? They don't scare me. I've called them before, and they always side with me. I run this neighborhood." "You don't run anything," Marcus said quietly. "Not anymore." And then the sound came. Low at first, almost drowned by the rain, the growl of engines, multiple vehicles turning into the street. Headlights sliced through the darkness, bright and unyielding. Black SUVs rolled up, doors opening in unison. Karen's face drained. Of color as 6 figures stepped out, moving with precision, their presence unmistakable. Tactical gear, calm intensity, and an air of authority that silenced the entire street. The neighborhood lights flicked on one by one as curtains parted, eyes peeking out. The task force. Karen staggered back. What is this?" she stammered, her voice faltering. "What's going on?" The leader of the group stepped forward, his badge catching the glow of the headlights. His tone was steady, controlled. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle. You're interfering with government property." The words hit like a hammer. Karen's eyes snapped to Marcus, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Realization crashed over her like a wave. This wasn't just a Jeep. This wasn't just some quiet man she could bully. She had been waging war against something far larger than her clipboard and her petty rules could ever touch. No, this isn't possible," she whispered, shaking her head. He's just some neighbor." Marcus finally broke his silence, his voice calm but heavy. "I tried to warn you, Karen. I gave you every chance to stop, but you wouldn't listen." Her knees seemed to buckle. The man beside her didn't wait. He bolted down the street, vanishing into the shadows, leaving her alone in the harsh beam of the task force's headlights. Neighbors poured out of their houses now, gathering on porches and lawns despite the rain. The Lopez kids clung to their parents, the Hendersons whispered in shock, and the Millers exchanged glances of disbelief. For years, they had lived under Karen's thumb, bending to her will. And now, in one single moment, the balance of power shifted forever. Karen's voice cracked as she tried to regain control. You can't do this to me. I was protecting the neighborhood. I was keeping order. The leader of the task force cut her off. "No, ma'am. What, you were doing was harassment, and tonight you crossed into criminal territory." Marcus looked at her one last time, his expression unreadable. "This could have ended differently, but you chose this path." 2 officers guided Karen toward one of the SUVs. She resisted, at first, shouting protests that rang hollow in the rain, but her words were drowned out by the silence of the crowd. No one came to her defense. No one stepped forward. For the first time in years, Karen stood utterly alone. As the SUVs pulled away, taking her with them, the neighborhood stood in stunned quiet. Then, slowly, the whispers began. Relief, shock, gratitude, all of it mingling in the cool night air. Marcus turned toward his Jeep, running his hand along its frame. He wasn't smiling, but there was a weight lifted from his shoulders. This wasn't the life he wanted, but sometimes life didn't give choices. It demanded action. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her umbrella tilted against the rain. "Marcus," she said softly, we had no idea." He nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "You weren't supposed to." And with that, he walked back into his house, the door closing quietly behind him. The neighborhood didn't know all the details. They didn't know the missions, the risks, the reasons why a government task force Jeep had ended up in their quiet cul-de-sac. But they knew one thing for certain. Karen's reign of fear was over. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened. Without her constant surveillance, the street blossomed. Neighbors talked more, helped each other more, laughed more. Children played freely on the sidewalks, families gathered on porches, and for the first time in years, Maplewood felt like home again. Marcus stayed in the background, never asking for recognition. But people knew. They knew who had stood firm, who had faced down the storm, who had brought light back to their lives. And though they never said it aloud, they all shared the same silent thought whenever they saw him tending his garden or driving. His Jeep. Sometimes the quietest neighbor carries the strongest shield, and Maplewood would never forget it.